every reaction that we ever had has at some point be a good idea. That's the very reconciling notion of that thought, that at some point this was developmentally like a victory. What we already know is that meaning making is a coping mechanism. Our mind wants to understand in the case of helplessness. So generally, when do we need to cope? We need to cope when something is overwhelming us. Something is happening that we don't know how to handle, and that creates a reaction within us that is usually either a trauma, like a re-traumatizing situation, or if we're not falling back into trauma, we're coping with it. And everybody does that. Otherwise, we're constantly re-traumatized. But if something is overwhelming, too much, the feeling of too much, then we have our strategies to handle that. When we cope, we're being pushed back into old behavior, generally, unless we're young, that the coping is actually a new thing. And that's what that beautiful saying is giving us, that every reaction that we ever had has at some point be a good idea. That's the very reconciling notion of that thought, that at some point this was developmentally like a victory. And only now, when we have developed far beyond it, it feels like a limitation. It feels like a pushback into old behavior. So the 5 most common behavior coping mechanisms, I've clustered them along the 5 lines. The most common one is suppression. So what we think there is that this doesn't belong to me. I ignore my reaction and pretend that nothing happened, basically. So we ignore our physical reaction to the whole situation. It's really a physical ignoring. It's a numbing out. That's what suppression basically is. So we pretend it didn't happen. Avoidance, coping behavior number 2. I want to get away from this. That's a freedom tether. So if freedom is very important, we avoid. Because we feel manipulated into something. We feel forced into something that we don't want to have anything to do with. Something has been so uncomfortable, and our strategy was not getting out of the way by ignoring it, but like literally by physically getting away. It's too loud to ignore it, so we distance ourselves. That's avoidance. Then we have the desire to be different. We feel that the way we are is truly wrong underneath, because you experience something that's kind of overwhelming and you feel that you can't handle it. And then you're ashamed of your incapability to handle it. And out of that shame, you create your origin story. So I need to be more unique than everybody else because I kind of want to cover this up, that I can't handle these things. And so I need to set myself apart in a certain way. That's a beautiful coping that we can see in people who are very, they look different, and it's very important to them that they look different. There's always some kind of shame underneath, and it has a certain noise. It has a certain, like, you immediately recognize it. The next one is high intensity, because the notion is, I don't want to feel this, I want to feel different. And you kind of want to cover the feeling with something louder by doing something. So what you do is you go into risk. You deep dive into excitement. People who bungee jump and have very, like, I don't know, a very loud sex life, for example. A very, like, anything that kind of, where you go into connection with yourself or others in a way that seems you feel like this is kind of like, if you don't have that, you feel this is kind of scary. It's basically you want to cover a feeling with another feeling that needs to be much louder. And the last one is having to understand everything, because there is a helplessness and then you feel everything, the helplessness, everybody kind of has that. And then you start to cope. And people who have like a knack for pattern recognition, what you do is you have to understand everything. You do it subconsciously, and then later it plays out. It comes from a loss of meaning. This doesn't make sense. How can this make sense? I need to know where to put this in my inner landscape. So you kind of tunnel into it and try to figure out what's going on. And people who are very smart usually have that. If you're cognitively highly intelligent and you have the capability to read patterns, like you're also intuitively intelligent, as in you understand how things are connected. You're really good with complexity. Very small kids can already have that. That's not necessarily a trait of people who are like futurists or very wise with the amount of complexity they hold. So these are the 5 coping mechanisms. And if helplessness, to go into the meaning making, because that's today's topic, if we step into the stage 4.5, if you look on the patterns of orientation, you have contemplation there as qualia. And that means everything is different. I didn't see that. How did I miss this? What's coming up? This is overwhelming and I want to make sense of it. So new information is entering that has not, where culture does not give us any answers. We do not get meaning making from the outside. Our surroundings, they make meaning in a way that suddenly doesn't make sense for us anymore, because you feel like, okay, that's all there is, or I'm stuck in this, or you behave in a way that was comfortable for years and now I just feel like there's gotta be something else to this. So that's the meaning crisis. And then we all eventually veer into meaning making as a coping, because it's still a coping because we feel still helpless underneath. And it's our way to fight out of the helplessness, to understand what's actually going on. And it's a way, why is it a coping? Because it's a way to gain back control. We feel like we've lost orientation. We don't know where to go. We don't know what we're doing here. Nothing makes sense. Why is this happening to me? Where's the path? And when we're entering the pathless path, which is happening if we go beyond the 4.5, because there is no culture giving us any instructions, so the path is still in front of us, but we don't have any signposts. So far, there were people who say, do try it like this, or do this, I don't know, educational piece, or learn this skill, or adopt this value. And suddenly there is no more signposts. So we have outsourced meaning making until we go into the 4.5. And then we're kind of looping in this and feel things are different. And we realize, oh, there is nobody else. Is there anybody else? That's why we need to find the others at that time. And so we actually have the deep conversation. So if helplessness in the face of overwhelm was your initial reaction, your initial coping, because suppression wouldn't work, the first thing that we do as a coping, when it was not just coming up with 4.5, but it was always your thing, what happened is that we veer off into finding logic. That's a 3.5 state, and it's very, like say, socially accepted. You know, you reduce, you're overwhelmed by a fact finding. A lot of people do that. Like we all have a little bit of the other copings too. We just have one main thing that we end up with looping, but that doesn't mean that we don't, if we have meaning making as a coping, it doesn't mean we don't suppress, or it doesn't mean we don't avoid. It's all there, but we have one of these major things. So all of us, when we try to understand something was overwhelming, we try to reduce the facts. We try to get to the point. We kind of veer off into logic. And then eventually, when we create our moral cluster, like our values, we are explaining why things don't work instead of going into the responsibility. We delegate the responsibility to change something by finding reasons for what happened and why we can't change it. That's all a very masculine behavior, by the way. The feminine would implode and create a lot of drama in that sense. Like, I don't understand, la la la, and then we watch, I don't know, we binge watch series to understand how romance works, for example. That's a very feminine thing to go about it. Whereas the masculine would go into over-explaining things. That's where the term mansplaining is coming from, because it's a masculine trait. The feminine is the drama and the masculine is the abstraction, going into the head. The feminine goes deeper into the sensual bodily, what's the word? Metabolizing, basically. So the real contemplation only starts with 4.5 because it has a different edge to it. It's a proper, it's not a sorting things and then it's done again. You don't get ever done anymore. The pathless path stays the pathless path. And you're trying to kind of create your own signposts, getting them into the earth and say, okay, this way. If I'm, I've already, where was that signpost? Oh, there, this is how to do it. And then it becomes a little bit more automated in your meaning making, basically. But when we're at that stage, we get to know the other copings a bit better. And we do this with our environment because there will be somebody who's avoidant. There will be somebody who's suppressing. There will be somebody who's having all the other, who's very loud and special. And there will be somebody who is risking their necks all the time. And because we want to see this is all reminding us of ourselves. So, when have I done this as my former self? And when am I still doing this? It wouldn't be in our periphery if it didn't have any meaning for us. It doesn't mean the exact story is the meaning, but the pattern behind it. So if we start to pioneer culture, we get to know the other copings. And of course, that's exhausting to people. The whole discussion is exhausting to people who just want to function. And there is this, that's what they say about the divine feminine, that we enter the room and people are triggered. That's why the whole idea of the feminine is dangerous. That's where it comes from. The masculine is, by the way, also dangerous because the masculine is is constantly asking those tricky questions and wanting to penetrate each problem in the depth of it and not just solve the symptomatic story here. There's something underneath. So the masculine becomes dangerous in the pioneering state because they want to really understand it. The feminine becomes dangerous because they embody something nobody understands. Their embodiment, they don't penetrate, they radiate something more. And something more is uncomfortable for people who want to stay in their something small. And especially in the masculine world, I think David Data said that beautifully. He said, the masculine so craves the nothingness, and you are a lot of something. And that's basically the whole issue that we have when we are polarized with each other. And as women out there in the field, fostering change, empowering people to get into movement in their inner worlds, to become more of themselves. That's why I realized at some point I need to become so very kind, because nobody wants to hear it otherwise. And even if you enter with kindness and love, it might trigger the hell out of people because it makes them understand that they can't love this. The thing is, sensitivity is not pathology, it's information. But it becomes suffering when we confuse information with responsibility. Because you are my mirror is not the same as I must digest everything inside your mirror. And then, especially when we come very close to a person, we tend to do that. If we feel everything, if we're very open, then we feel, oh, the person has a problem, and we start to metabolize their problem instead of understanding this is their situation, and at the same time it attaches to me at my wound, and this is actually my part. That doesn't, we're not responsible for theirs. This is like it's almost like it's intertwined in a twisted way. Because of understanding what's my thing, we start to interpret, because they are doing this and this and la la la, and we are in their story, instead of saying their story. What's my story? Why is this here? So to separate resonance from responsibility, and that doesn't mean we avoid, but we become responsible for, why am I creating this? Why am I attracting this? That's metabolization without entanglement. And this is where the ease comes in. And that's the step beyond meaning making. We're still making meaning, but not from on the outside. We stopped othering the meaning making, as in, why is the person doing this? And we're becoming responsible. Why am I doing this? Oh, I'm projecting, obviously. What am I projecting here? Where does this come from? And what does this person trigger? So then, and only then, we grow into the deep knowing. And the deep knowing is what comes beyond the meaning making. Thank you very much.